In a shrinking river pool, one enormous resident carries a problem that water alone cannot wash away. The rubbing has changed the mud on its skin, not the scale of the burden beneath and between the folds. The burden remains concentrated in the same protected folds, where scratching and shaking bring little relief. Around the ears, protected creases give the smallest opportunists places to remain attached. The hippo disappears beneath the surface, but immersion does not instantly erase what has settled into protected skin folds. Rolling shifts mud across the skin, yet the deepest problem areas remain largely unchanged. Mud and pressure offer temporary relief, but the established burden still holds in the hardest places to reach. Now, smaller animals begin to investigate the opportunities created around the resting giant. The first visitors approach carefully. Around an animal this powerful, every feeding opportunity comes with risk. The giant is still heavily affected, but more of the river's smallest opportunists are beginning to notice. On land, another group of opportunists begins testing the boundaries of the giant's tolerance. The first landing is a test. One sudden movement could end the opportunity instantly. The bird works only a tiny patch. Across the rest of the body, the burden remains almost unchanged. For the first time, one small patch shows improvement. Everywhere else, the problem remains. Above and below the waterline, different creatures exploit different opportunities around the same enormous body. Then the giant moves, and every smaller animal remembers exactly what it is working beside. This is not a gentle host. A territorial hippo can turn a feeding opportunity into danger without warning. Only when the giant settles does the river begin closing around it again. Progress comes in patches, one small area at a time, while most of the burden still remains. The change is still small. The giant remains heavily affected, but the living network around it is beginning to work. The first cleaned areas begin to widen, but most of the giant's burden remains untouched. Below the surface, another small area begins to change, while the upper body remains heavily affected. The feeding ground moves. When the giant leaves the water, every smaller creature must decide whether to follow. The feeding session ends instantly. Another giant has announced itself nearby. The giant abandons rest and returns to the water, where territory can matter more than discomfort. For a territorial hippo, another giant is not a visitor. It is a challenge. The rival gives ground. Only then can the smaller lives around the pool begin to return. The danger passes. The cleaned patches remain. And around the settling giant, the work cautiously begins again. The change is becoming easier to see, but the deepest folds and broad center of the back still hold much of the remaining burden. As the giant returns to deeper water, the cleaner areas remain cleaner, and the work shifts below the surface again. Repeated visits slowly expand the improved area below the waterline, while the hardest upper body zones remain. For the smallest visitors, the feeding opportunity can disappear in a single powerful movement. Another river resident enters the shallows, and every smaller creature clears the space between them. The warning is immediate. In this part of the pool, the giant decides how close is too close. When the giant settles again, the birds return to one of the largest remaining problem areas. The broad back is finally beginning to improve, but protected folds around the neck and ears still hold the most persistent burden. The improvement is now substantial, but not complete. The hardest places remain, and now the work reaches one of the most protected areas, where progress must come slowly. The outer crease improves first. Deeper inside, the most persistent burden still remains.
Below the surface, repeated visits extend the improvement little by little across the lower body.
A crowded waterway changes everything. The smallest creatures vanish the moment the giant becomes agitated. The larger visitors choose another route. Conflict is avoided, and the river slowly settles again. Another major section begins to improve, leaving fewer places where the remaining burden can persist. Now the hardest refuges remain, the deepest folds where access is limited and progress is slowest. The giant is no longer carrying the burden seen at the beginning, but a few protected places remain, and the smallest visitors are not finished yet. The heavy burden that once filled these folds has been reduced to only a few protected pockets. Below the surface, the relationship continues, not as a single rescue, but as repeated opportunities within the river itself. Improvement has not changed the animal itself. The cleaners still work beside one of Africa's most unpredictable giants. When the giant settles, the smallest visitors return to the few scattered places still offering a meal. The change is now unmistakable. The giant is not perfectly free of irritation, but the heavy burden has been greatly reduced. Earlier, irritation kept the giant restless. Now its movements have become slower, quieter, and less desperate. None of these creatures came to perform a rescue. They came to feed, and the giant benefited from their repeated attention. The parasites did not vanish in a single moment, and the cleaners did not arrive as rescuers.